The galaxy was on the brink of war. The Galactic Alliance had spent years preparing for this moment, a war against the Xorith Empire, a ruthless and technologically advanced race that had long been a threat to galactic peace. As the war began to unfold, the Alliance knew they would need every ship they had at their disposal to stand a chance against the Xorith overwhelming forces. The battle plans were set, the fleets assembled, and all eyes were on the massive dreadnoughts and advanced destroyers, the ships that would carry the future of the galaxy into battle. But in the midst of all this preparation, one ship was forgotten. It was a small and seemingly insignificant vessel called the Sable Widow, a human ship that had been relegated to the farthest reaches of the fleet yards. Considered outdated by modern standards, the Sable Widow was nothing more than a relic of a bygone era. In the eyes of the High Command, the ship was old, slow, and poorly equipped. Compared to the more advanced ships of the Alliance, it had no place in a battle of such immense scale. Its weaponry was weak, its hull riddled with repairs, its crew a mix of experienced veterans and young soldiers eager to prove themselves. It was not the type of ship that inspired confidence, and yet it was the only ship that had been assigned to Captain Elias Kane, a man whose career had stalled long ago. He was seen as a capable officer, but nothing extraordinary. His appointment to the Sable Widow was seen as a dead-end assignment, a punishment more than an opportunity, and the ship's outdated technology seemed to match his own fading prospects in the fleet. Kane had once been a rising star, but the years had dulled his shine. As the war loomed closer, Kane found himself leading a ship that seemed destined to be forgotten by history. While other commanders prepared for the coming battle, Kane was left in the background, with nothing but his crew and an old ship to work with. The Sable Widow was not meant for glory. Its purpose was mundane. It was a supply ship, a ship for reconnaissance, a ship that was meant to watch from the sidelines, while the real heroes took center stage. But even the most overlooked of vessels can carry secrets beneath the surface. Kane had never fully understood the true power of his ship. Its advanced artificial intelligence, Elderstone, was an ancient and mysterious program far more sophisticated than any modern eye in the fleet. Elderstone was capable of adapting and learning in ways that no one could anticipate. It was not just an artificial intelligence, it was a living mind, embedded in the ship's systems. From the moment Kane set foot on the ship, he could feel something different, something powerful, and yet he had no idea what he was about to unlock. Kane was not the type to look for hidden advantages or favor hidden technology. He focused on the mission at hand, doing his duty with unwavering determination. He trusted his crew and followed the orders given to him. But deep down he knew there was more to the Sable Widow than met the eye. It was just a matter of time before the ship would reveal its true potential, and when that moment arrived, it would change everything. The Xorith Empire made its move without warning. One moment, the Alliance fleet was preparing for battle, and the next, the Xorith launched a devastating surprise attack. The Xorith were known for their ruthless tactics and their ability to strike when least expected. They arrived in full force. Their ships were massive, heavily armed, and capable of overwhelming any opposition. The Alliance fleet was caught off guard, scattered and unprepared for the sudden onslaught. The larger ships of the fleet struggled to adjust to the Xorith's relentless speed and devastating firepower. Their advanced weapons tore through the defenses of the Alliance's warships, and soon chaos spread across the battlefield. The Xorith capital ships moved like shadows, striking from unexpected angles, and before the Alliance could recover, the damage was already done. Ships were lost. Every second that passed brought the fleet closer to total defeat. In the heart of the battle, Captain Kane stood on the bridge of the Sable Widow, staring out at the chaos unfolding in front of him. The ship he commanded was far from the front lines, and it wasn't even meant to engage in battle. Kane was just one captain among many, and his ship was a relic no one took seriously. The Alliance had never expected it to be more than a supply runner. Yet as he watched the larger ships struggle to mount any form of defense, Kane saw an opportunity, an opening that no one else had noticed. Elderstone's voice echoed in his mind, its calm tone contrasting the chaos outside. It spoke of a weakness within the Xorith strategy, a vulnerability that could be exploited. It explained that the Xorith relied too heavily on their sheer strength, their overwhelming firepower, but this also meant they left themselves open in certain areas where their ships were not as fast or as nimble the Xorith underestimated smaller ships, like the Sable Widow ships, that could slip in and out of battle unnoticed and strike at weak points. Kane knew the plan sounded reckless. No one would ever believe him if he suggested it. But as the battle raged around him, he realized this might be the only chance to make a difference. The Xorith were too focused on the bigger ships. They hadn't considered the smaller vessels that could slip past their defenses. Kane made the decision he would not sit idly by while the fleet crumbled around him. It was time to act on Elderstone's advice. He gave the order, and the Sable Widow moved into action. The ship was small and fast, able to maneuver with precision. Kane instructed his crew to follow the guidance of the eye and strike at the Xorith vessels from behind enemy lines. Using the element of surprise, Kane was gambling everything on this plan. If it failed, the entire fleet could fall apart. But if it succeeded, they could turn the tide of the battle. The ship raced through the chaos, staying just out of the Xorith's range and launching a series of surgical strikes on key targets. It was a dangerous move. The Xorith soon realized they had a new threat to deal with, one they hadn't expected. The Sable Widow was a ghost among the chaos. Its weapons were small but deadly, its crew focused and determined. It was a ship they had ignored and underestimated, but one that would soon prove far more dangerous than they ever imagined. As the Sable Widow moved deeper into the chaos, the Xorith began to notice the small human ship darting in and out of their formation. It was a blur, a shadow slipping between the gaps in their lines. The Alliance fleet commanders who had once written off Kane's ship were now beginning to wonder if he had uncovered something the larger ships were unable to see. The Xorith were formidable. They relied on brute strength and overwhelming numbers. Their advanced technology was unmatched, but they had become complacent. Their ships were designed for direct confrontation, and their tactics had always been about superiority through power. They did not anticipate a smaller vessel slipping past their defenses, striking with precision and disappearing before they could retaliate. Captain Kane's strategy was unorthodox, but it was working. The Sable Widow struck with the force of a much larger ship, hitting key Xorith vessels in the weakest parts of their hulls and disrupting their command systems. Each successful strike crippled a small part of their massive war machine. The crew of the Sable Widow was a mix of veterans and rookies. Many of them had no experience in battle before, but under Kane's leadership they began to operate as one cohesive unit. The tension that had hung over them when they first left port began to dissolve as they realized that they were part of something bigger than themselves. The once overlooked ship was now at the center of a growing resistance to the Xorith invaders. Elderstone guided them with cold precision, adapting their tactics as the battle progressed. It wasn't just about firepower, it was about outsmarting the enemy, exploiting their weaknesses, and using the environment to their advantage. Kane had trusted Elderstone from the start, but now he could see just how advanced the eye truly was. It wasn't just following orders, it was thinking creatively. It was evolving before his eyes. As they struck more Xorith ships, the Alliance fleet commanders began to take notice. At first, they were skeptical, but they couldn't deny the results. They watched as the Sable Widow danced through the battlefield, evading larger ships and using stealth to disrupt the Xorith command structure. The strikes were surgical and precise, causing chaos in the Xorith ranks. Kane's crew began to find new strength in their mission. What had started as an underdog story was turning into a tale of defiance and resilience. The crew now believed in their captain and in the ship they had once thought of as little more than a relic. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a small ship that was making a big difference in a war where every ship mattered. As the battle raged on, Kane could feel the tide shifting. The Xorith were beginning to fracture, their coordinated strikes becoming less effective as their focus scattered. They were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The once overlooked Sable Widow had become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of strategy and willpower. In the face of overwhelming odds, the Alliance fleets still struggled, but with each successful strike by Kane's ship, they grew bolder and more confident. It was a moment of hope amidst the chaos, a glimmer of light in the dark. The Xorith had underestimated humanity, But now they were starting to learn that humans were capable of far more than they had given them credit for. The Xorith soon realized that their initial strategy was failing. They had underestimated the Sable Widow and Captain Kane's crew in their haste to crush the Alliance fleet. They had ignored the threat posed by this small ship. Now they scrambled to counter the damage being done to their command vessels and supply ships. But the more they focused on the Sable Widow, the more their larger ships became vulnerable. The Xorith began deploying specialized ships designed to track and destroy smaller vessels like Kane's ship. They had created a new plan to corner the Sable Widow and destroy it once and for all. The new Xorith ships were fast and deadly. They were equipped with advanced sensors that could pick up even the faintest of signals. These ships were designed for one purpose: to hunt down and eliminate the smallest of targets that could slip past the larger Xorith warships. And in that moment, Captain Kane understood the gravity of the situation. The odds were higher than ever. The Xorith were no longer just relying on brute force. They had adapted to the tactics used by the Sable Widow, and now they were coming for it with everything they had. The once strategic advantage of speed and stealth was quickly evaporating. The Xorith would stop at nothing to end this threat. Kane was faced with a difficult decision. Retreat was not an option. The battle was too far gone. He couldn't afford to let the Xorith reclaim their upper hand. He had to push forward. But now the stakes were higher than ever. As the Xorith closed and Kane's crew braced themselves for what was to come, they had become more than just a crew. They were a family forged in the heat of battle. They trusted Kane, and they trusted Elderstone. The Eye had become more than a tool. It was a partner. It saw things they couldn't and calculated moves they hadn't even considered yet. Under Elderstone's guidance, they executed a series of feints and diversions that kept the Xorith fleet guessing. Kane knew they had to use everything they had, and then some. The Sable Widow was still outnumbered and outgunned, but it had one thing: the Xorith lacked adaptability. Kane used the speed of his ship to lure the Xorith into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Xorith ships would strike and Kane would slip away just in time, using the natural obstacles of the battlefield like asteroid fields and debris clusters to hide their movements. But the Xorith were learning quickly. Each time they were fooled, their response grew more dangerous. The specialized hunter ships grew relentless in their pursuit. The gap between the two sides narrowed as the Xorith started to close in tighter and tighter. Kane could feel the pressure mounting. He had already lost half his crew in previous engagements, and if this last push failed, there would be no way out. But even as the danger rose, a spark of defiance burned within him. Kane wouldn't let it end like this. He couldn't let it. The Sable Widow may have been forgotten by the Alliance, but it would not be forgotten now. Kane's heart pounded as he made the call to take the fight to the Xorith head-on. He knew the risk was extreme, but he was willing to put it all on the line. He set a course straight for the Xorith command center. The final confrontation had begun. As the Sable Widow charged toward the heart of the Xorith fleet, Captain Kane could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had no illusions about the danger they faced. This was a final gamble. If they failed, it would be the end of them all. But the thought of retreat never crossed his mind. The crew was with him. They had proven themselves time and time again. Under his leadership, they had become something more than just a crew. They had become a team. Each person had found their strength in the chaos of battle, and now it was time to put everything they had learned to the ultimate test. The Xorith fleet was closing in, but Kane knew that the key to victory wasn't in overpowering them. It was in using their arrogance against them. They had underestimated the Sable Widow, and now it was time to show them just how wrong they had been. With Elderstone guiding them every step of the way, Kane devised a daring plan. They would create a decoy, a fake attack on one of the Alliance's larger ships, making it appear as if the Sable Widow was retreating in panic while the Xorith focused on the diversion. Kane would slip in behind their lines and strike at their command center, the heart of the Xorith fleet, where their leaders and strategic planning were located. The gamble was risky, but it was their only chance to turn the tide of the battle. The crew worked quickly and with precision. Under Kane's orders, they set the trap. The Xorith hunter ships closed in on them. They were fast and deadly, but Kane was faster. The Sable Widow darted between the massive Xorith warships like a dart in a hurricane. The decoy was successful. The Xorith fell for it hook, line, and sinker. They focused all their attention on the fake target, leaving the real threat unnoticed behind their ranks. Kane's heart raced as the crew executed the plan flawlessly. The eye was calculating every move, predicting the enemy's reactions. As they closed in on their target, the Xorith command center was just ahead. Kane knew the time had come to act. They had to strike fast and hit hard. He gave the order, and the Sable Widow turned sharply, firing its weapons with pinpoint accuracy at the vulnerable sections of the Xorith command ships. The first explosion shook the Xorith fleet like a thunderclap, and Kane's crew cheered. They had done it. They had breached the heart of the enemy's operations. But the battle was far from over. The Xorith quickly responded, their fleets shifting to intercept them. The once overlooked vessel had become the centerpiece of the fight, and the Xorith were no longer underestimating it. Kane's mind raced as he issued orders to the crew to avoid being overwhelmed. They had taken down the command center, but now they had to survive long enough to make that victory count. The Xorith were coming at them with everything they had, but the Sable Widow was faster. It dodged through the incoming fire, moving like a ghost in the storm. The ship wasn't just a vessel anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of defiance against the overwhelming force of the Xorith Empire. Kane's crew fought with everything they had, their energy unwavering. Even as the odds grew steeper and steeper, the pressure was on them. But they were not ready to give up, not yet, and not ever. The battle raged on, but the Alliance fleet was beginning to rally. They saw the Xorith faltering. They saw their strength broken bit by bit. And in that moment, Captain Kane realized they might just have a chance to win. The battle had shifted, but the fight was far from over. As the Sable Widow danced through the Xorith fleet, Kane could feel the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. They had breached the command center, but the Xorith were relentless. They would not give up their dominance. Without a fight, the Xorith ships swarmed around them, faster and more furious than ever before. Their hunter ships remained on the prowl, their weapons firing with deadly precision. But the Sable Widow had learned how to survive. It moved with unmatched agility, dodging and weaving through the Xorith onslaught, while delivering powerful strikes at their weak points. The crew was working as one, every member focused on their task. Elderstone's voice remained steady and calm, offering guidance as the chaos of battle swirled around them. The eye had become their lifeline, calculating angles and predicting the Xorith's every move. It had evolved into something more than a mere program. It was the beating heart of the Sable Widow, and the reason they had lasted this long. With each successful strike against the Xorith, the Alliance fleet grew more confident. They rallied behind the message sent by the Sable Widow, that no matter how small a force may seem, they could still be the catalyst for change. The Xorith had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were paying the price. The Alliance fleet was beginning to fight back with renewed vigor, capitalizing on the confusion within the Xorith lines. As the larger ships found their mark, the Xorith were thrown into disarray. They couldn't process what was happening. It was as if the very foundation of their strategy had been shaken, and with it their confidence began to erode. Still, the Xorith fought desperately to regain control, but they couldn't keep up with the unpredictable nature of the Sable Widow's assault. Kane and his crew had forced them onto unfamiliar ground. The Xorith were no longer in charge. They were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. They were scrambling to adjust, their focus split between dealing with the decoy and the attacks that kept coming from behind their lines. The gap between them and victory was closing faster than Kane had ever imagined. But he knew they couldn't let up now. The Xorith were dangerous in ways that could not be underestimated, and as long as they had ships left, they would fight to the bitter end. The Sable Widow had already taken heavy fire. Its hull was badly damaged, and its weapon systems were starting to show signs of strain. But Kane refused to back down. They couldn't afford to lose this moment. It wasn't just the battle for survival now. It was the battle for the future of the galaxy. The crew knew this was their time to make a mark in history. This was their time to prove that they were more than just soldiers aboard an old ship. They were warriors who had come together against the greatest odds to change the course of the war. As the Xorith regrouped and attempted to retaliate, Kane made the call to strike one last decisive blow. They would take down the last remaining Xorith flagship, the heart of their remaining fleet. It was a dangerous gamble, But it was their final chance to tip the scales once and for all. With every ounce of energy left in the ship, Kane ordered a direct assault on the flagship, and for the first time since the beginning of the battle, the Xorith Empire was forced onto the defensive. They had met their match in the most unexpected place, a ship they had long overlooked, but now it was their greatest nightmare. The final assault on the Xorith flagship began with the full force of the Sable Widow behind it. Kane knew that this was the pivotal moment. If they could take down the flagship, it would break the Xorith's will to fight, but the risks were greater than ever. The ship was battered from the countless hits it had taken. The crew was tired, but resolute. They had fought through every challenge that the Xorith had thrown at them, and now they were facing the heart of the enemy fleet. The flagship loomed ahead, its size massive and imposing, but Kane saw only opportunity. He knew that if they could breach its defenses and disable its command structure, they would cripple the Xorith forces for good. With Elderstone calculating their path through the chaos, the Sable Widow weaved through the remaining Xorith ships like a dancer, slipping between the gaps and avoiding incoming fire. The Xorith flagship was surrounded by a dense ring of hunter ships designed to intercept any incoming attack, but Kane knew the key was precision. The Sable Widow was small, fast, and agile, and it could slip past the Xorith defenses with the right strategy. They were close now, so close the flagship loomed just ahead. Kane tightened his grip on the control panel and issued the final orders to his crew. They knew their role. By now, every crew member moved with a purpose. They had become a well-oiled machine, each one trusting the other without hesitation. In the chaos of battle, this was their strength. They had become one with their ship and one with each other. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear. They would strike now or never. And as they closed the distance, the Xorith flagship unleashed a torrent of fire. The deadly weapons streaked toward them with blinding speed. But Kane wasn't worried. The Sable Widow was fast, and it had Elderstone to guide them with uncanny precision. The ship weaved through the barrage with moments to spare. The crew worked in unison, guiding the ship into a perfect position behind the flagship. Kane gave the command, and the Sable Widow's weapons fired in a flurry of calculated shots, hitting weak points in the flagship's hull. The first strike sent a massive explosion rippling across the Xorith ship. It faltered for a moment, but then retaliated with a devastating counterattack. The flagship's weaponry rained down on the Sable Widow. The ship shook violently as the blast hit it. The crew braced for impact, but the ship held strong. Kane's heart pounded in his chest, but he could see the results. The flagship's shields were failing. It was weakening. The Xorith flagship had always been the keystone of the entire Xorith fleet. If it fell, the entire structure of their forces would crumble. Kane ordered the next round of attacks, and the Sable Widow moved in for the final blow with calculated precision. They hit the flagship's exposed core. In a series of rapid strikes, the impact was immense, and the flagship groaned under the pressure. As explosions tore through its interior, it was clear the flagship was done for. It would fall, and with it the Xorith fleet's ability to maintain control over the battlefield. The Sable Widow had done it. They had breached the most heavily guarded vessel in the Xorith fleet, and in doing so, had shattered their strategic backbone. The Xorith fleet faltered. Their coordination broken. The Alliance fleet saw the shift and surged forward with newfound strength. It was over. The tide had turned, and the once overlooked vessel had become the key to victory. As the Xorith flagship exploded in a massive fireball, the shockwave rippled across the battlefield, and for the first time since the battle began, a wave of hope surged through the Alliance fleet. They had witnessed the impossible. A ship they had all but written off had just delivered the decisive blow to the heart of the enemy forces. The Xorith fleet was in disarray. Their command structure shattered, their coordination gone. The larger Xorith ships faltered and began to retreat, but it was too late. The Alliance fleet moved in swiftly and decisively. The smaller ships followed the example set by the Sable Widow and struck at the weak points of the remaining Xorith warships. Their once unbeaten force was crumbling before their eyes. The fight was far from over, But the Xorith had lost their edge, their resolve was shattered. Kane watched from the bridge of the Sable Widow as the once formidable fleet of the Xorith scattered in a panic. The Alliance fleet moved forward with relentless speed, picking off ship after ship. As they fell one by one in the wake of their loss, the Xorith retreated into deep space, abandoning the field of battle entirely. In defeat, the Alliance fleet surged forward, securing victory. Where it had once seemed impossible, the crew of the Sable Widow was silent for a moment as they processed what had just happened. They had done it. They had won against all odds. The battle that had seemed like an insurmountable challenge was now a victory, their victory. The crew looked at each other with disbelief. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But it wasn't just the victory that held them in awe. It was the realization that they had accomplished something unimaginable. The Alliance fleet had stood strong, but it was the Sable Widow, the forgotten vessel, that had turned the tide of battle, and in doing so had changed the course of the war forever. Captain Kane stood on the bridge looking at his crew, his heart swelling with pride. They had become legends in their own right. They had proven that even the most overlooked and underestimated could make a difference. They had fought with everything they had, and had not only survived but thrived in the face of overwhelming force. He looked out at the battlefield where the remains of the Xorith fleet floated in space. It was a sight he would never forget. It was the symbol of what they had achieved together. Kane turned to Elderstone and whispered a quiet thanks to the Eye. It had been more than just a tool. It had been a true partner, guiding them when they needed it most. The crew had come together because they believed in each other and in their captain, and in that belief they had found the strength to overcome the impossible. The victory was theirs, but more than that, they had proved to the galaxy that humanity could face any enemy, no matter how powerful or overwhelming, and emerge victorious. Kane turned to his crew and gave a simple order: prepare to head home. And as the Sable Widow sailed through the stars, leaving behind the debris of the shattered Xorith fleet, it carried with it the hope of a new future. The Alliance had been given a chance to rebuild, and it was thanks to a ship they had once overlooked.